Bullshit.
Pretend for a moment we've entered a parallel universe, free of bullshit and full of bold solutions. That's what the No BS show is all about. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich, and let's cut the bullshit. Many leaders think asking for help on strategy is a sign of weakness because they see it as exclusively an internal responsibility. The art of marketing is recognized but looked at warily, while the science of marketing is barely acknowledged. When it comes to target market analysis and segmentation, a common refrain is, we know who our target markets are. Internal teams rarely have the resources and bandwidth to do it all by themselves. That's why asking for help with your marketing strategy and tactical implementation is actually a sign of strength. Find a trusted expert to give you an outside perspective. Map out what parts of both the strategic and tactical activities team members, both internal and external, will handle. Make it a partnership, not just a vendor relationship. There are other areas in your business where a vendor relationship might work. Marketing's not one of those. It's not a commodity, piece of equipment, or administrative task. While you probably do have a good understanding of your target markets, consider that one tweak or enhancement of your market segmentation could dramatically improve your bottom line. Hearing an outside perspective doesn't make you any less of a leader. It means you have ideas about your company and want to hear an outside expert's perspective on those ideas. Marketing needs to be a focus of both your internal and external team members. Leverage outside expertise to enhance both your strategy and your tactics. Our guest today is Abby Goldstein, who describes herself as a hardcore radio person who's worked in TV and radio her entire career. She's general manager of WYEP, whose mission is to enrich the community through music discovery, expression, and education by delivering quality programming on the air and online and through live music events. WYEP attracts an audience of about 100,000 listeners per week. Abby, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave.
So let's get right to it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your career path.
So I got started in radio when I was in college. My mother was the membership director for the public radio station on campus where I went to college in Southeast Texas. And I was a theater major, and she was working at the radio station, and the radio station was upstairs from the theater. So I saw her all the time, and I used to go hang out with her and her buds, her colleagues, and eat lunch some days with them. And they were just so funny and glib and off the cuff. And I built sort of rapport with her station manager and her development director and her program director. And so a weekend shift came up, and I was going to school full time, and my mother was complaining how they couldn't find anybody good to fill this weekend shift. And it was a tiny radio station, like a staff of 6 people. And I said, I'll do it. She said, really? It's just sitting there in the studio for 8 hours on a Saturday night. I said, yeah, it's not a problem. I was involved in theater, so I knew there'd be a couple of productions that I wouldn't be able to make a shift, but that's 2 or 3 times a year. I said, yeah, I could use a little extra money. And plus I love the radio station. And so I trained and I went in and I did this Saturday night shift, and I had one live break at 9 o'clock at night. I did a legal ID. Everything else was on tape or on cart. And the first time I opened that microphone and did that live ID, I shut that microphone off, and I was quivering and just bathed in sweat. And I thought, this is it. This is, I've been bitten by the radio bug. This is where my career begins. And I hadn't even finished college. So I went from there I did some commercial radio in Southeast Texas. I moved to Dallas and got on at KERA, the big public radio station there, and I kind of built my career in Dallas at KERA. I went off, I did commercial radio for a few years there, and then I came back to KERA in the early aughts as their program director. Did that for 6 years, and again started kind of building a bit of a national presence there as a program director. And in 2006, I took a job in New Hampshire at New Hampshire Public Radio. And you think New Hampshire's small, but that station is a powerful station. And it's a statewide network and very well resourced and well supported. And I came in under a new CEO who taught me a ton of really important skills and really great kind of thinking tools. And she really kind of helped make me ready for this position here in Pittsburgh. So, I started just with a one live break on a Saturday night back in 1989, and now I'm general manager here in Pittsburgh. So
let's talk about getting bitten by the radio bug, because I was as a teenager, and it's forever, isn't it?
It is. It is. And even when I was doing non-radio jobs, so I was a booking agent for a while. I produced street festivals in Dallas for a year. I was an independent record promoter, so I was on the phone every day calling program directors around the country, bugging them to play stuff I was representing. Even when I was doing non-radio things, I still would go to a station and say, hey, give me 2 hours on a Sunday night. I want to do a Texas music show. So even when I wasn't doing radio full time, I still managed to keep my foot in the door there because I couldn't live without it.
That's why I think I'm doing a podcast. It's kind of like radio.
That's it.
Let's talk a little bit about radio pre-consolidation, because I wasn't in radio in the 70s. I was a kid listening to it, but I got into radio as a teenager in the 80s. And the difference in radio pre the consolidation and pre the deregulation, which allowed large corporations to buy it, was amazing. Talk about how much more freedom there was and how fun that was.
It was a lot of fun. There were a lot of mom and pop owned stations, a lot of small stations that couldn't afford big, expensive equipment and big staffs. So you had, 3 or 4 people doing everything and doing it live, much more live broadcasting back in those times. And now everything is voice tracked, and it's one person records breaks for 16 different cities. And so the person that you're listening to doesn't know anything about your community. So it's part of why I think public radio is still so compelling, because we are integral to the fabric of the local community. That's what our job is to serve the community, not serve the stakeholders. So I really do feel like the spirit of broadcast pre-regulation lives on in public media.
So I like to get a little bit technical, but the first time I walked into a radio station, this freaked me out, and you used the term cart. Explain that to our listeners.
So a cart, it's actually kind of an antique now, but most of the stuff that you would play was on tape of some kind, and if you had commercials, they were on tape. Or if you did an interview with somebody, it was on tape. And we used to have these big reels of tape that we would physically splice with a razor blade and little splicing tape. Now that's all done electronically, which makes it so much better, and it has a much longer life. But, back in the day, you had these little cassette type things. They looked like 8-tracks.
Yes, looked like 8-tracks.
But it was called a cart. And it had a loop of tape on it, and it had an auto stop on it, so you could put multiple cuts on one cart. You could have a 2-minute cart that had, multiple commercials, 4 30-second spots on it, and it would auto stop at the end of each spot. But that's how you did what you did. And in some cases, even the music was on cart.
Interviews. I would cut
interviews.
away, and I'd be interviewing someone, say, from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I would say, and he said, Lewis Lips said that it was a difficult catch. And you'd hit that cut, then you come back, and Lips later added that once he caught it, he had and then he hit the next one.
It's all, and so it would go into this machine that looked a little bit like an 8-track deck, and then you could skip to the next cut, cue it up, and that's how you played stuff back in the day, was on cart. That's what you had. And when I started at that radio station, they had just gotten their first CD players. Mm-hmm. So it was a big deal. And in fact, I had a great blooper when I first started at that radio station in Southeast Texas. I eventually started doing a late night jazz show from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. I think I had 5 listeners. The phone rang like once every 2 weeks. And when the phone rang, I thought, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I actually said from the 91.3 FM compact disc player instead of compact disc. Great blooper. But yeah,
that's beautiful.
My program director wasn't too happy about that.
The beauty of radio pre-social media was the anonymity.
Yeah.
It was just your mind and your voice talking. So it didn't matter what my age was until I had to go interview someone. And then they could see that you were like...
That you were 12?
Yeah. It reminds me of Almost Famous when he's on the phone getting the Rolling Stone job. And then they go, what? You're 12?
Yeah. It is. It's like that. I think a lot of people from the on-air side get into radio because they don't have to face the public. So, we work with a lot of people that have like major neuroses. And interacting with human beings is definitely one of them. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why people sit in a dark room behind a microphone and don't have a camera on them. And there was a move about 15 years ago to put, when stations started getting really active online, there was a move to put cameras in the studio. It was, people said, oh, we want to know what's going on in the studio. And the on-air staffs at radio stations rebelled. They said, no, we're here because we don't want people to see us.
Exactly.
That's exactly why they want to do it.
Exactly. Well, we've all seen it, and I jokingly say, maybe even smelled it, bullshit in the workplace. So now's your chance to give me an example from the past when you just had to say, that's BS.
Let's see, that's BS.
Could be a company culture, could be questionable leadership, lousy customer service, narrow-minded employees, poor work ethic.
So when I was working at KERA in Dallas, and this is a big operation, TV and radio, they had, and I was the program director on the radio side. They had some serious issues. They'd had a round of layoffs, and then a year and a half later, another round of layoffs. And just a few months after that second round of layoffs, the CEO sort of mysteriously resigned. And it was right after the first of the year. We all got an email saying that the CEO had stepped down and that we were not going to see him again. It was clear, when that happens, right? There's no, I'm taking another job and I'm giving 2 months notice. There's none of that. Mm-hmm. It's like, he's gone, he's done. You're not going to see him again. Mm-hmm. And a group of sort of senior leadership people, the department heads from all these different departments, sort of formed this working management group, and they knew it was going to be a while before they hired a new CEO. So they sort of went off and huddled and made all these organizational decisions that were complete BS. And, the rest of the staff, there were, 80 people, 90 people on staff got called into this meeting, and they just sort of laid out all these strategies that they were going to undertake until the new CEO came in. And most of them involved gutting the local programming. So it was the cancellation of, a couple of different radio shows. It was locally produced, live hosted radio shows. It was the cancellation of a regular weekly television program because they claimed they didn't have the resources. And it just, in my opinion, when you have a financial hardship, you don't punish your audience for that. You find other areas within your company to create savings, but you certainly don't go first to your local programming and gut that. That's the last thing you should be looking at. So that was BS. And in fact, my resume went out, days later from that meeting.
Now, do you think that when that happens, it's just because that's such an easier thing to do because you can say, I quickly reduced labor, and they're just not even thinking about the audience and how there can be an ROI on the local program?
Yeah, I do think that's part of it. I also think that sometimes the loudest voice at the table is not necessarily the smartest voice at the table. And I think there were a couple of people in that management group that were the loudest voices, but not necessarily the smartest voices. And I think other folks in that management team sort of fell in behind those loudest voices. And those loudest voices, the refrain typically was, we don't have the resources. Mm-hmm. But out of the same breath as we're gutting local programming came, we're going to spend $100,000 on a new toolkit for the underwriting team. So it wasn't cost savings, it was cost shifting. And it was not cost shifting that was beneficial to the audience. It was cost shifting that was beneficial to the revenue strategy. And so you can't cut off one arm and add it to the other side of your body and be functional. Mm-hmm. So that's BS as far as I'm concerned.
When I think of media outlets, radio programming, TV, print, newspapers, I think that there has to remain that local presence, and that's been the biggest shift. Is so many smaller papers and TV stations and so forth struggling. What are your thoughts on where we'll end up? Because we saw this big change in the last 15 years as the internet took over. Where do you think we'll end up? Because the local presence, to me, is still so valuable.
I actually see it shifting to more of a local presence, because what people can get digitally now that isn't locally hosted is as good or better of a product as what a local broadcast or media entity can deliver, just at their base level. So, we don't have a monopoly on information or content anymore. We just don't. That radio tower used to be an ivory tower, and it's not anymore. And if you look at what our competition in the digital world is doing, if you look at what Pandora's up to, and you look at what Apple has done with Beats One, it's hosted. And so it's the connection to that human voice that is compelling to people. I think that's what we've always done in public media. I think commercial radio has gotten away from that to their detriment. And if you look, there's a moment in time where I think the media industry should have woken up, and it was 9/11. Here there were planes hitting the towers in New York, and a multitude of radio stations were voice tracked. There was no human being in the building at that time that could tell people what was going on. We're public service media. That's our job, is to serve the public. Those are broadcast licenses granted by the federal government. It's not, we treat them like commerce, but that's really not in essence what their job is. So I think that the media companies that will continue to be successful in a digital environment will continue to be locally hosted and continue to provide that human connection with a human being on the other side of the broadcast.
Makes sense. So now we're going to put you on the spot. Talk about a learning experience when maybe you were the BS employee, a tough boss, or maybe your communication wasn't what it needed to be. Looking back, when were you guilty of some BS?
Wow. You just want one instance, right?
You can give as many as you'd like. We have a radio camaraderie, you and I, so you can have a little bit more flexibility than most guests.
So early in my career, after I moved to Dallas, a new program director, a new station manager had come in, and they told me around September or October that they were going to change my title and make me music director. I was sort of promotions and public affairs and an on-air host. And, I was in my probably early 30s, maybe 30, 31, and months went by and I didn't hear anything. Months, 3 or 4 months went by. And, I had brought it up to my boss, my program director, once or twice, and he said, well, that we're not sure yet. And I was like, well, but you guys promised me that you were going to do this. And he was like, yeah, don't worry about it. I felt like I was being blown off, and I got really frustrated. And toward the end of the year, and I used to work. I would work all day Christmas because I'm Jewish, and I wanted my colleagues to be able to spend time with their family. And I didn't mind. It was fun to me. And so that Christmas day of that year, I was there all day. I did like a 12-hour shift. And as the day went on, I just became more and more resentful that nobody had followed up with me on this issue. And here I was putting myself out there so that my colleagues could have the day off. And I felt very underappreciated. And so I sent this just incredible nastygram to my station manager and my program director. And my station manager blew up, came back after the holiday break and just read me the riot act. And my poor program director was just in this really rock hard place, and he felt like I had gone out of control. And I actually told them that I had contacted an attorney about discrimination, that I felt like there was discrimination in the workplace. I had a conversation with somebody, but they were not a practicing HR attorney. So I bullshitted them. And it scared the hell out of the station manager. And 2 weeks later, I got the title, and it was a done deal. But my program director was just burned up about it for a really long time. I damaged that relationship, that professional relationship.
So from that standpoint, the BS was you manipulated a little bit, and you learned because the relationship was an important one and was damaged.
Well, and I didn't follow up in a timely manner. Within weeks of this promise that was made to me, I should have come back and said, hey, what about that conversation we had about the title change? Can you give me a timeline? I'd like to know, what's going on here. But I didn't. I let it sort of languish for months and allowed myself to become angry and resentful. So it came out in a nastygram. Instead of it being managed all along in a healthy communicative relationship, I let it blow up. I blew it up. So, yeah.
That's our guest today, Abby Goldstein, the YEP general manager here in public radio in Pittsburgh. So we have to move a little bit into our marketing side. And I like to talk about what we define as marketing at Mass Solutions, because we look at it a little bit differently in our opinion. I guess most marketers do. But we try to go and combine the art and science of marketing. We talk about how it's clearly defining your target markets, but then doing marketing intel to go out and find out what they want, and then listen so you can develop or tweak your product to give it to them when and where they want it at a price they're willing to pay, and then tell them about it again and again. The bullshit happens when the vast majority of people in the world think that marketing is that last little piece of telling them about it again and again. But you have to do that heavy lifting at the beginning to make it an art and a science by doing the definition and the segmentation of the target markets, by going out and talking to those target markets, listening, developing, and tweaking it. Then you can tell them about it again and again, and that can be fun. So think back to what's been your most amazing moment in your experience with marketing or messaging. What's your biggest marketing or messaging success?
It's interesting the way you put that, because really when you think about marketing, you sort of have to put branding ahead of that, because it's really, it's just as much about how people react and interact with you as opposed to sort of pushing them toward a desired outcome, and especially now in a digital age. So I always like to think, I'm a big Tom Assacker fan, and one of the things he wrote about that sort of stuck with me is that that successful branding is not how people feel about you. It's how they feel about themselves in the presence of your brand. So I think you have to put that first before you think about how to sort of go after a product. I think it's about sort of what is the psychology of your audience? What is your target audience? And, how do they think and feel, and what motivates them? From a successful marketing standpoint, there's a couple of little things that I can think of. When I was in Dallas the first time around, we got front row tickets to a Lyle Lovett concert that they said we could give away.
Oh, Suzanne's over here going crazy.
I know, she loves it.
She's a huge Lyle Lovett.
So I cooked up this promotion that we called Big Hair on the Front Row. And we asked people to draw pictures of themselves listening to the radio station and send them in. And then out of that, we would pick a winner. And this was pre-social media. We barely had a website. Like, think about how fun that would be now in a visual environment. But we actually, when we had a fund drive the next time and we had volunteers coming in to answer phones, we sort of posted them around the room so people could see these drawings. But we got amazing drawings. I mean, we got somebody like cut the side off a Kleenex box because she'd been sick that week. She'd had a flu. So she was at home in bed listening to the station like all day and all night while she was with this flu. And so she cut the side of the Kleenex box and then drew herself in bed with the Kleenex and a cup of tea. It was really cute. And we had a guy who did home renovations that put the station on when he was working inside these houses, and he sent his drawing of himself on a ladder on the back of a piece of wallpaper. So we just got great stuff out of that. It was just really a really fun event. And when we went to the concert that night, the people were just excited about it. The front row winners were really excited about it. It was just a lot of fun.
You made it about them,
right?
And
their experience,
their creativity, made an emotional connection.
Yeah, and then there was another thing that just recently happened. We did here at WYEP. We wanted to. I'm on this kick to reduce on-air fundraising. We need to do it because that's how we operate. Half our budget comes from individual donors, but it's repelling to people. that we get on the air and interrupt their programming and ask them for money. They don't like it. Even though they'll give us money, it's a necessary evil. And so I decided I wanted to implement this idea that other stations have been doing across the country, that reduces the amount of fundraising by going on the air 3 weeks out with an aggressive sort of promotional campaign. And it included everything: direct mail, telemarketing, on-air spots, everything through our social media and our web. And it all sort of fell into a set of message points around helping us raise the money we needed without interrupting programming. And within 2 days of going on the air, everywhere I went in the community and I met people, they'd be like, "Oh, how are you doing on that fundraiser? I heard that thing about reducing the amount of program. That's great. I hope you do that. How much have you raised so far?" And it was 2 days in to a 3-week campaign. So that, I think, really cut through quickly. People got the message in the mail. They got it through an e-blast. They heard it on the air, and it was all sort of seamless and integrated. We did have to do 1 day of on-air fundraising, but normally we would do 9 days. So I think that's a huge win.
That is. It's another huge marketing messaging success. And I want to continue down this path because then I like to ask people, what's the big idea, and talk about their 2 whys. Why is their reason for being? The second is their customer's reason for buying. Let's go through, because this ties back to another thing I'm passionate about, is Western Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh having so many great things that I think only a segment of the population know about. And I would say your station is a great thing, and I'm thinking only a segment really knows enough about it. So I normally ask you to talk about what's your big idea, and I think this is a great time for you to tell us that big idea of the station and why someone who doesn't know anything about it maybe could really enjoy learning more.
Okay. This is a biggie. You ready?
I am.
It's big. So Pittsburgh is at this very, very cool inflection point right now with the building of our tech economy and startup economy. And so there's this great influx of people. And I just was at the Allegheny Conference annual meeting, and they put up a slide that said that the median age in Pittsburgh is now like 34 years old, which is amazing that in a short amount of time, the city has gotten so much younger. And it is an influx of a younger workforce coming in to work in our tech and startup economy here. I think Pittsburgh has a real opportunity to become a hub for the creation, production, and distribution of original music. And I think WYEP can be a center point for a campaign like that, for a development process for the community to come together and create a music-based economy here in Pittsburgh. Right now we've got, a club here, a club there, a band here, a band there, recording studio here and there. Nobody works together. They're all sort of off in their little pockets. And it's very much of a Pittsburgh thing, right? You kind of stay in your little bubble, right? If you live in the South Hills, you probably come into work downtown and go right home, and you have your church or your synagogue and the places you shop and your friends, and that's your bubble. That's the world in which you live. And I think that's very true for the music community here. Not so much for the arts community. I think there's a lot more kind of, cohabitation in the cultural district thanks to the Cultural Trust. But in terms of original music, it's you go to Millvale to one club, you go to the South Side to another club, you go to Lawrenceville to one, it's all sort of disparate and spread out. So I imagine a city where the creation and distribution of original music happens in a much larger ecosystem. So, there's resources for local artists to get together and perform at clubs that are centrally located. There's resources where the recording studios work together. If someone's full, they can refer to another studio. So, I think that could happen here. It's going to take somebody really thinking through how to make that happen. And I think WYEP as a music radio station with deep local roots can play a big role in that. So that's that's my big idea, is as Pittsburgh is growing its fabulous performing arts scene, and it's growing its technology, and the infrastructure is coming together, and we put all these bike lanes in, and the bike share, and Uber is here. It's like we're booming now. But that music piece is missing. And I think it's so important to people's lives. And there's great musicians here. There's great artists here that we're not sort of helping to nurture and promote. So that's the big idea. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
You had me at hello. Actually, you had me at the 34 years old. I'm psyched that's the median age.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
I think it's amazing, actually. And I might be wrong. It might have been 32. It was 30s. I was lower 30s, and it sort of wormed into my brain, and it's kind of blown my mind because I've thought that Pittsburgh was a much older city, but I just think in the last 5 years or so, it's really changed a lot.
So, Abby, how can listeners contact you if they'd like to learn more about what you do?
Well, you go to our website, wyep.org, or drop me an email it's abby@wyep.org, ABBY.
Well, thanks for being on the show. This was really a good time.
It was fun. I hope that there's some good information out there for folks. So.
Excellent information, good tip, good feedback, good ideas for people to apply as leaders and communicators. Mm-hmm. And thank you for listening and joining us for the No Bullshit Marketing Podcast. Visit boldsolutionsnobs.com for show notes, plus additional marketing and messaging resources. Sign up for light reading. You'll receive valuable strategies every other week to improve your marketing and transform your messaging. It really is light, taking 2 minutes or less to read, and it just might trigger bright ideas for you. To sign up, visit masssolutions.biz. Remember, ask yourself, what's the big idea? And build your story around the answer. It's all about bold solutions.